Hello, 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 everyone. Let's talk about travel. When we talk about travel, of course, we're talking about business travel and what needs to be done when we know that someone is going on a business trip. So, a lot of this is in relation to administration and administrative assistant planning, because oftentimes, if you are an administrative assistant, like a secretary, or maybe just somebody who's assisting in the office, you may not be the person going on the trip. However, you may need to support the individual that's going on the business trip itself. They can have business trips for things like meetings, or just to try out new products, or just to try out a new location, spot out a country to see if it's worth investing in, or if it's worth adding another location. These are some of the reasons that you're going to travel on for a business trip. And so oftentimes those trips require a lot of preparation. Things need to be done before, things need to be done during, and then of course after, things need to be done as well. And so all of that we're going to cover in this section of travel. Of course, welcome to the virtual space. Let's work together to learn, share ideas, participate, and learn something new. The wise always seek knowledge. So let's talk about business travel. These are trips made for the purpose of business, whether, like I said, it be a meeting, or to get a new client, or to get new business, or scope some particular location out. And so when it comes to these trips and these travels, what you have to do is, if you have things like meetings or things that have a particular time, it's going to be important to make sure that you schedule those times into whomever is traveling their itinerary or their day-to-day activities. You want to make sure that they're aware of everything they have to be present for. And if there are particular times they have to be present, they should be aware of those times. And so as an individual scheduling a business trip for someone, you want to make sure that you're aware of all of the times that they have to be to specific places. You need to know where those specific places are, who contact persons are, and get information that's going to help the traveler to make sure they get whatever they need done in the foreign country. And so that involves confirming dates, times, and meeting places for meetings. It involves organizing information for the individuals. Let's say you're going to a meeting or you're going to meet a specific client. Well, there might be some information you need to carry with you. And so the individual responsible for helping prepare may want to put that information together so that the traveler has easy access to know who they're meeting and know information about the person, so that they can have conversation, or so they can know exactly what they're trying to sell to them, so that they have all of the information that they need to make the trip successful. Also important to note, you also need to check for safety conditions whenever you're traveling. So the person preparing may want to look ahead. If you know you're traveling next week to maybe a Cozumel or something like that, take a look at the weather advisories, take a look at travel advisories to let you know, what is the weather going to be like when you intend to travel? Is there bad weather? Should we reschedule? What's the climate like in terms of safety? What about vaccines? What about illnesses? What's going on in that country that I can make sure the person that's traveling is going to be safe, and give them tips on what they should do and should not do. Should they not travel after hours? Should they not take taxis? Should they not try Ubers? Should they get their own vehicles? Travel advisories are things that give that information that normally the person preparing for the trip should have, okay? You want to make reservations for things like travel, hotel, and airlines, because you don't want to have to worry about that stuff at the last minute. The earlier you plan, the better your rates are. And so you want to get ahead of that before the trip starts. Normally, the individual also prepares an itinerary, and we'll talk about that a bit later. And that just gives information to the individual that's traveling, puts everything in one place. So if they want to find anything out about their trip, they can look at one document and be satisfied, gather materials, and then put them together in what we call a travel folder. All of these things we're going to continue to talk about as it relates to business travel. So, of course, we know that there are different ways that we can travel. And so, depending on where we're going, you're going to have different options. Options being airline travel, sea travel by boat. Sometimes it might involve train and it might involve vehicle, whether it's a private vehicle that you're driving yourself or a community or public vehicle like a train or a bus or something like that. These are different ways that that you can travel. And so as you're planning for a trip and planning to travel, you want to make sure that you understand how the trip should go. Try to understand the best way to travel where you're going. So if, of course, you're traveling to another island in the Bahamas, depending on the options, you might have a choice between a boat or a plane. Those are probably going to be your only options. And so depending on the cost and how quickly you want to get there, or the time you want to get there, you can make a decision between sea or air travel based on what you need, based on the needs, based on the funds that are available to make that trip. And so those are some key things you pay attention to when deciding on how to travel. The funds that you have, the cost, the urgency, how quickly you need to get there. Those are the main reasons why you choose between different ways of travel. When we think about traveling, some items that are needed when traveling for business, you want to need your itinerary, like I said, which gives you an idea of what's being done throughout the entire trip. You're going to need any tickets. So that can be physical tickets, printed out tickets from, let's say, if you have air travel, airfare tickets, your border pass or your border ticket, whatever it's called now, because those are kind of obsolete now. Everybody uses electronic tickets, which are tickets that are in electronic format, usually a PDF or a picture of something that's sent to your email. You're going to need that information, any funds you're going to need, because of course, on business travel, you're going to need some funds just for accommodations, just in case you need to catch taxis or catch vehicles, for food, for any accidentals that come up that you need to purchase. All of these things you're going to need funds for. And so it's important to know that you're going to need those funds. Of course, in order to travel anywhere, you're going to need your passport, you're going to need visa, health documents. Sometimes they require you to have a health certificate. Sometimes they require you to have an immunization card or immunization certificate, because depending on where you're going, they may have certain requirements that you need to meet. If they have health requirements, let's say they require you to have certain vaccinations, then maybe you need to have a vaccination card or a vaccination document that says which vaccinations you have and how up to date you are. Some companies require it. And so therefore, that's a part of the planning as well. Depending on where you're going, you need to find out what the requirements are to travel to that country so that the traveler meets all of those requirements by the time you have to actually go on the trip. Of course, we have a visa. A visa is needed in most instances to get in just about every country. And it's something that's normally provided by the foreign country, not your home country. So I don't need a visa to travel in the Bahamas. I just need a visa to travel outside of the Bahamas and to get into other countries. Every country might not have a visa. They might accept you having a particular visa, and that's okay. But depending on where you're going, you may need a visa to travel to Europe, a particular country in Europe, or definitely you would need a visa to travel into the US. And so you would have to make that application with the country that you're traveling to. And they provide the visa, they print it out for you in your passport. They normally request that you send your passport. They put the visa in and they send it back to you. So you want to make sure you have sufficient time to get a visa wherever you're going. When we talk about passport, that is issued in your country. So Bahamians would have a Bahamian passport. US citizens would have a US passport. Guyanese would have a Guyanese passport. And so normally that's required as long as you're traveling outside of your country. For example, if I'm traveling from Grand Bahama to Nassau or Grand Bahama to Eleuthera or Nassau to Andros, I don't really need my passport. My passport is needed for traveling outside. I can use it, but it's not required. And so that's something that is key to remember when you're traveling within your country. Maybe you only need an ID. That could be a national insurance card with your photo on it. It could also be a driver's license with your photo on it, voter's card. Once you have a photo ID, you tend to be able to travel very easily throughout your country. It's outside of your country that you are required to have a passport. You're normally required to have a visa at minimum. Sometimes it may require a police record or something like that. But like I said, it's about finding out what that particular country requires. Of course, if you have travel tickets for airlines, you're going to have something for hotel or motel stay, car rental confirmations. That information you need to be able to have and need to get in order to make sure that the trip is planned properly and that you have access to everything you need. Sometimes we have maps, GPSs, depending on how you're traveling. You're going to need directions in the event that you're not exactly sure where you're going, whether you're driving yourself or whether you're catching a ride in a taxi. You need to be able to explain where you're going. And so directions are key. Any speeches that you need to give where you're going, you should have that as well. Any reports that you need, any files that you need for different meetings, all of those you want to make sure you have for your trip. Some companies give you forms that you fill out, and these forms are based on what you spent. Normally, at the end of a trip, you want to put all of your costs together so that you're able to identify how much you spent on that trip, including airfare, travel, tickets on the train, tickets in a bus, tickets or payment for your car, accommodations, your hotel stay, food, all of that. Companies normally want you to put together in the form of an expense report. And so sometimes they may send you may have forms to get that process started. You also want to make sure you carry any extra paper, pens, etc. Anything that you think you're going to need to be comfortable when you're on a trip is what you're going to need to bring. And of course, if there's any equipment that you need, you're going to make sure you bring that as well. All right. So these are key things that are needed when you're traveling. And oftentimes, a lot of these things are going to be inside what we call your travel folder, which is just a folder that contains all of the items, all of the documents, all of the copies of things that you need in traveling. You're putting it all in one place that makes it easier to find, and it should make the traveling process a whole lot easier. All right, so we gave an idea of some of the documents already, but let's continue to talk about these documents. Key documents needed are going to be your passport, some form of ID in the event that you're renting a car. Maybe you want to always make sure you carry some type of driver's license that says that you passed some test somewhere to be on the road. So you want to make sure you carry some form of ID, your visa, which should be in your passport, any immunization or vaccination cards that are needed, like I say, based on your trip and what's required. And so these may be some minimum things that are required when you're traveling on the trip. Some other things or some other documents that may be needed, an entry permit. Sometimes they require you to fill out a particular form to enter for business purposes. It's different from traveling for vacation purposes. And so an entry permit may be required as well that allows or grants you entry into a country in order to perform business. A health certificate as well can be something that talks about your health. If you got a physical or if you got a particular test that they needed you to take before entry, health certificates as well. And then something like a tax clearance certificate may also be needed depending on what type of business is going on, because different countries have different taxes. And getting a certain certificate or a certain document related to taxes can spare you having to pay certain taxes because you're not a national or because you're just there on business for a short period of time. And so those are some documents that may be needed in the travel process as well. Now we talked about the travel folder, which contains all of the things that we need, all of the paperwork we need, all of the reports, all of the confirmations. We're going to print those out just so that you have it In the event that you can't access your email or can't access something, you have it in printed form. That's necessary. So now let's talk about your itinerary. And so an itinerary is a document that provides as much travel detail as possible to the traveler. And so it's going to contain information like where you're going, so what country you're going to, the airline information, maybe the name of the airline you're traveling on, the location of the airport, confirmation number from the booked flight. All of that is necessary. We need to know maybe where your hotel stay is going to be, the name of the hotel, the address, the number for the hotel, and as well as a confirmation number. Oftentimes, when you book these things online, you get some type of confirmation number that lets you know this is your reservation. So confirmation number, reservation number, oftentimes a series of letters and numbers together that the hotel uses to pull up your information quickly, to pull up your reservation quickly. Maybe you need to know with whom. So maybe a meeting with a particular person on this trip. Who are you meeting? What's the name of that individual? What's the number of that individual? Where can you find them? What time are you supposed to meet them? All of the information you can know. Who's picking you up? Who's supposed to drop you off? Who are you meeting with exactly? All of the information is usually on the itinerary. When, as well, is very important on itinerary. When do you check in? Are there check-in times available for the hotel? Is there check-out times? What time does your flight leave? What time do you have to be to the airport? What time does your flight arrive? All of that information is on the itinerary. Do you have transfers between airports? Do you have multiple stops? Do you need to know where these multiple stops are? Are there layovers, which are the short periods of time that you have to wait in between flights? All of this is going to be useful to the traveler. And so it should be in the travel itinerary. Time zone differences are a big one as well. We come across information like time zones, and time zones are pretty important because let's say I'm traveling from the Bahamas and I'm going to Australia. By the time I get to Australia, it's not going to be the time I expect it to be. I'm traveling over a long period of time, which means I'm traveling over time zones. And if you can recall, time zones, it could be a particular time here. So right now it could be 10 o'clock in the Bahamas, but in Australia, it's going to be a different time at that exact same moment. And so as you're traveling across timelines, you're going to have to adjust to the time in the country that you're going to. And so a traveler needs to know that, because by the time you come off of the plane or you come off of the boat, you may have your watch saying a certain thing, but your meeting is scheduled for a time in that time zone. And so you're going to need to be aware of time changes to make sure that you're still on time for meetings and that you're not late and that you're just aware of what's happening. You're aware whether or not you can check in, or you're aware of where you need to be at a particular time. And so itineraries are key for this entire process. So on the screen here, I have an example of an itinerary taken from a textbook. Itinerary, this one is for Charlene Stanford. I guess that's the person that's actually making the trip. And so on the side here, I have some information. When preparing an itinerary, you must make sure you include all details of the travel. If I look over here, I see there are a number of dates and times written down exactly. It starts off with May 17th to the 19th. And so we start with the date May, and you're giving the times in which everything is necessary. They're telling you that you're leaving the particular airport on a Delta flight, and they give you the flight number. In the event that something happens, you know what your flight number is. It tells you when you're going to arrive in Dallas International Airport. You're picking up a rental car at a particular rental counter. The confirmation number is this here. And your hotel reservations are this particular hotel on this particular street. This is the phone number. This is a confirmation number. They're very detailed. Meeting with a particular person, they give the name, their title, the company that they work for, the location, the phone number, and the reason for the meeting, all of which is specifically spelled out in the itinerary. The more detailed, the better for an itinerary. Any special instructions or reminders are given. So anything in particular, they're giving as much detail as possible. They're giving phone numbers, they're giving confirmation numbers. They're allowing time for travel in between appointments. So we're looking at the times here. You arrive at 10:50 a.m., but that's well ahead of when this meeting actually is. So you're giving time in the event that something happened during the travel. Maybe a flight is late, maybe a flight had to be pushed back. You're allowing time to get to the meeting on time. Dinner at 7 p.m. So as you see, everything is not pushed together and clustered together, one right after the next. 1 hour, next hour you're doing this, next hour you're doing that. No, you're giving time. What should also happen is there should be multiple copies of the itinerary. Maybe you want to email a copy. You want to put a copy in the travel folder, of course. You want to put a copy in the person's bag just in case they lose a copy, or maybe they left their bag or they forgot the travel folder. They have access to it somewhere else so that they're always up to date with what they should be doing. The itinerary should be easy to read in an easy to read format. You can easily tell what needs to be done on Monday, what needs to be done on Tuesday, and it's clear and everything is neatly presented. You want to include a day-to-day schedule. So if the travel or the trip is for 3 days, you should specify what should happen on each of the 3 days and separate those 3 days in a clear manner. Try to include it in chronological order, starting from the earliest date to the furthest date. So we're starting from in the AM going out to PM. PM going out to PM. So we're starting from the earliest possible time down to the latest. You want to include contact and direction information for all hotels and reservations, include airport locations, and include name and contact for persons you are meeting with. And so if you ever ask to prepare itinerary, those are the main things you're going to do. You're going to make sure specify who it's for. You're going to specify the days, separate each day, and you're going to specify the exact time that the person needs to do whatever they need to do. You should say what period of time the travel is for, May 5th, 17th to the 19th, and then you should give as much detail as possible with the different activities, whether it be hotel stays, airline, tickets, confirmation numbers, telephone numbers, locations, dinner times, dinner dates, leaving and arrival times. All of this you need to put in itinerary. All of it is expected. When we talk about itinerary and travel, some things you want to note as well is having proper travel etiquette. And so it's more than just making sure you have brought everything that you're supposed to bring, but you also need to act a certain way accordingly as well, or pay attention to certain things as you travel. You want to make sure you dress appropriately for travel and for any meetings you're attending. In the event that something happens and you end up in the country at a very late time or possibly close to the appointment, you want to make sure that it's okay for you to quickly change or be comfortable enough to go to that meeting that you're going to attend. You want to make sure you follow any common customs given. If in that particular country, they handshake or they bow when they're meeting someone, or they, do the kiss on the cheek thing, you want to make sure you are aware, so that if they do it towards you, you understand why they're doing it and you're not offended or anything like that. You want to know what's happening. Those are customs of a company. You want to make sure you're always on time for every meeting. You want to take sufficient business cards to give out your information, so that whomever you're meeting with has clear information, or anybody that you miss and come in contact with that is helpful, you can give them your information as well. If possible, provide gifts if it's appropriate in that country. If they accept gifts, business gifts, well, you want to provide that as well. Offer to pay for any meals for your client. You don't want to take somebody out on a business meeting and not pay the bill unless they requested that you come, then that's different. If you request to meet with them, you want to cover that bill. That's most appropriate. Always start with a good handshake and make eye contact, make the person feel comfortable, make them feel good when you're going to meet with them. You want to make sure, pay attention to your body language and any gestures. Know what's offensive in that culture. If it's offensive to sit while somebody's speaking with you, you should know that ahead of time so that you don't offend anybody indirectly, unwillingly, or unknowingly. And you have the best chances for a great outcome for your trip itself. You want to know how to pronounce any names of the persons you will meet with ahead of time because you don't want to offend them. You want to speak standard and proper English. If there is a different um, language, then you want to know what that language is and see if you can find somebody who can help you with travel as well. And of course, after a business meeting, you always want to say thank you, send a thank you note, send a thank you email, a card, something to let them know that you appreciate them taking the time to meet with you. All of this is great for travel etiquette. You have to know it. You should be familiar with it. Things that you should do in preparation for traveling, just to make sure that the trip is smooth as possible and that you give off a very good impression. Another part of traveling is you want to be safe in traveling. And so for travel safety, you want to look for travel advisories of the country that you're visiting. And so that could be advisories as it relates to health, as it relates to weather, as it relates to crime. All of these advisories you want to go and look for. And advisories are just, I guess, a document or a write-up on a particular country, letting visitors know certain things about the country, letting them know, hey, it's not safe to travel or to be outside after 9 p.m. In this particular country. There are a lot of kidnappings that happen. And so therefore you plan accordingly in your itinerary to be in your hotel by a certain period of time. Knowing which areas are not good areas to be a part of, knowing which hotels are not the safest hotels. All of that you're going to find in travel advisories, which you can tend to find on travel websites. They give you a good idea, like Travelocity or TripAdvisor. They give you a lot of good information as relates to travel and tips and things like that for safety, as well as you can visit your country's website and look for travel advisories for different countries. Of course, in the Bahamas, we may not have a lot of them, but you can use US government sites. They normally offer travel advisories to US citizens. And if it's good for the US, it's good for us as well. And so we can take note and follow them as well. But companies, travel companies, as well as government agencies tend to offer this information. Why? Because if something happens while you're visiting a foreign country, there's always a consulate, which is a representative of your country. Normally, there's somebody there that can help you if something goes wrong. As a Bahamian citizen, if something happens in the US, there's an embassy that you can go to and you can get help if maybe you lost your passport or you lost your visa or something happened to you and you need assistance from somebody in your country, or you need to get contact with your country. You can always talk to the embassy, who has a consulate, which is a person that is has agreed to stay in a foreign country to assist its citizens that are in that country at that particular time. And so you can always go to them as well for assistance. You want to make sure you don't leave any luggage unattended in the event that somebody plans or put something in there. You want to always keep your passport and funds safe and secure at all times. You don't want to lose your passport when you're traveling. It's very difficult to get assistance. Not impossible once you go to your embassy, but it's difficult or it's very hard to get a replacement passport. You do not want to display any large amounts of cash or expensive jewelry. You want to be as minimalist as possible to avoid being threatened or being robbed or anything like that. You shouldn't agree to carry anything for anyone, especially persons you don't know or not familiar with, because it could be a setup. It could cause a problem later on. You want to make sure you lock all doors and windows in your hotel room, just to be sure. Don't leave any valuables in vehicles, and make sure you lock vehicle doors. Be aware of your surroundings. You want to protect your debit and credit cards at all times. Never leave it open. Pay attention when you're using it. Make sure nobody's looking at it. Check machines that you use as well to prevent theft. And then, of course, know where to find your company's embassy. In most major countries, you're going to see that there is an embassy. Smaller countries may not have one. And so you want to try and make sure go to a country where you at least have an embassy, or you know where you can go in the event that you need protection or that something happens to you while you're in that country. While you're away, what you're going to do, let's say you're the traveler and you're away from the office. What you want to do is you want to make sure that you leave instructions with someone who can help you tie up any loose ends or avoid any confusion while you're away. And so that means someone who's going to take calls or take messages for you. You want to let somebody know that they can take calls because you're not going to be there. Maybe make sure you leave a voicemail, asking people to leave messages. If there's a problem or if there's a challenge, you want to let somebody know, who do you direct somebody to? So let's say I work in the accounts department and my receptionist is aware that I'm on a trip. Yeah, they can take some messages, but some things can't wait. So what do I do? Do I want them to give them my number? Do I want them to give me a call and then I call the person back immediately? Or do I have a designated person who can assist individuals in my absence? All of that you want to make sure you're doing while you're away. You also want to let them know how you would like to be contacted. Do you want them to send an email? Do you want them to call, send a text? If there's an emergency, how should I be contacted as the traveler? And then even when you're away, you want to make sure that there are things don't come up that you're not aware of, or that they forget to tell you something that's important that happened. And so therefore, you always want to make sure that you also stay in touch with your office. That's always important as well. We talked briefly about traveling over time zones. And so I just want to remind you that a time zone is a region where the same standard of time is kept. This is an example of a time zone map in the US. When you're traveling from Florida to California, you're actually traveling over 1, 2, 3 time zones. So when it's 5 o'clock in Florida, it's actually 2 p.m. in California. And so these are the things that you need to know. In the event that you have to call back to the office in Florida or in the Bahamas, you need to know what time to call. You can't call at 3 p.m. In California to the Bahamas, because in the Bahamas, which follows Eastern Standard Time, it's going to be 6 p.m. and nobody's going to be in the office. So you need to know time zones to make sure that you can call at appropriate times, make sure that you can have meetings at appropriate times. All right. And so in case you don't remember, as you move across each time zone, either time is going to go up by an hour or it's going to go down. So that's why 3 time zones away, it's 5 p.m. in Florida, but it's 2 p.m. in California. As we move to the left, time is going down. It's going back. We're going back in time in terms of the time per of the day. Versus when you go from left to right, as you move right, you're going to see time is increasing by an hour each time. So when you're worried about or trying to figure out time zones, you need to know where this particular country is and how many time zones is between the two. So like I said, if Florida normally falls in line with the Bahamas, so in the Bahamas, if it's 6 o'clock in the Bahamas, that means it's going to be 5 o'clock in Central, 4 o'clock in Mountain Time, 3 o'clock in Pacific. You need to know this information, and you need to be understand and be comfortable of how to work it and how to calculate it if they give you this information. The Bahamas, if you wanted to know, is in -5 GMT Eastern Time. When we say GMT, that's Greenwich Meridian Time, which is where the UK is. So that, because it's a minus, that means in the UK is 5 hours ahead of the Bahamas. So minus on a time zone map means that everything is going to the left and everything is going to the right is going to be positive starting at Greenwich, which is the UK. So the UK is usually 0 And then everything to the left of it is a negative number going from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way to 12. And then everything to the right is going from positive 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. All to help us keep track of the time as we move from place to place. But Greenwich GMT is the central point, and we are 5 time zones away to the left, because it's a minus sign, of the UK. So no matter what time they give you for the UK, we're going to be 5 hours behind. If they give you a Bahamian time and ask you what time it is in the UK, then we have to actually add 5 hours, because they are 5 hours ahead of us, but we are 5 hours behind them. And so it's just a matter of understanding that. I'll go into more detail specifically on that in the Zoom in sections. When we look at America, America is divided into 4 time zones, which you need to be familiar with: Eastern, Central, Mountain, and Pacific. Just be familiar and know that we are in Eastern time zone. Oftentimes they like to ask for specific time zones. They like to use California, maybe sometimes New York, and Canada. Parts of Canada are aligned with us. Pacific is California. Just be kind of familiar with these things here as well. Common time zones. All time zones, like I said, are based on Greenwich Mean Time, or GMT. The international date line is what is an imaginary line on the Earth's surface defining the boundary between one day and the next. So as we go through time, there's only 24 hours in a day. And so after a while, there's going to be a line where if it's crossed, then we're crossing over into a brand new day. One country is in one particular day, the next country is in another particular day. That's how it works, pretty much. Like I said, London is the country sitting at Greenwich Mean, GMT, and it starts at 0. Like I said, all zones to the left are negative 1 to 12, going up. All zones to the right are positive 1 to 12. And so these are some things that I put here as well. UK or GMT, 5 hours ahead of the Bahamas. Paris, 6 hours ahead of the Bahamas. California, 3 hours behind. Houston, 2 hours behind. New Orleans, 1 hour behind. Miami or New York is the same. So I just put those there as just brief reminders. Okay, so we talked about time zones. And so let's point out when we're converting time over different time zones. What you want to do first is you want to determine, like I said, how far the destinations are apart. If destination is behind, then you're going to subtract those amount of hours based on the time zones apart. If the destination is ahead, then you're going to add hours. And then, of course, you convert to 12-hour time if needed. So, for example, if it's 2 p.m. in the Bahamas, then it is what time in the UK? The UK, like we saw, is 5 time zones ahead of the Bahamas, meaning that it's not going to be any later than 2 p.m. I mean, any earlier than 2 p.m. is going to be later. And so if it's 5 time zones, we have 2 p.m. plus 5 is 7. And so 7 is less than 12. And so what happens is I don't have to convert anything. It's straightforward. My answer is 7 p.m. in the UK. Now, when I say I don't have to worry about converting it, because it's under 12, I don't have to change my time. I have to pay attention. If it's 2 p.m. and I add 5 hours to it, it's still going to be in the p.m. We don't change from p.m. to a.m. until 12 a.m. And so let's say I'm converting and there's a time from 2 o'clock p.m. and the time zone is 10 out, I'll say 15 hours ahead of us. If it's 15 hours, that's kind of a lot. I'm going to use that not an example. I'm going to use the example of, let's say it's 9 a.m. and we're traveling somewhere that's 7 hours ahead of us. Well, or 7 time zones away from us. So we're going to add 9 plus 7, which of course is 16. 16 is greater than 12. And so that means I can't, unless I'm counting 24-hour time, I'll say 16 o'clock. But if I'm reporting it by AM and PM, I actually have to change, because there's no such thing as 16 p.m. There's either 1 to 12 or a.m. or p.m. And so in order to convert that back, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that 16, take 12 from it, and I'm going to get 5. And so 5, and now it's p.m. because, of course, if I'm 7 hours ahead of 9 a.m., that means I'm going to cross over into p.m. And so therefore, that would be an example of having to convert to 12-hour if needed. It all depends on when you're adding your timing. So let's quickly talk about 12-hour versus the 24-hour time. When we talk about 12-hour time, that's usually considered to be military time. And so it's any time that is greater than 12 o'clock, whether it's usually 12 o'clock p.m. And so normally you start from 0:00 when you hit 12 midnight, which is 12 a.m. And so when you're talking about military time, anything from 1 p.m. to 11:59 p.m. would be shown a certain way compared to if we're looking at a 12 hours time. We're used to 12-hour time, but in some countries, they report things by 24-hour time. So if right now it's 10 o'clock a.m., in another country, they could say 1000 hours. If it was 3 o'clock p.m., they would actually say 1500 hours instead of p.m. They don't say a.m. and they don't say p.m. And so it's just important to know that you can convert the time between 12-hour time and 24-hour time simply by adding 12 to the first hour of the day and including a.m. So let's say if it's, adding 12 to the first hour of the day, that's if we're going over into the p.m. section. So if it's 7 p.m. now and I want to convert it to 24-hour time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take 7 plus 12. I'm going to add 12 to my morning time, or the 7 o'clock time, and I'm going to get 19 o'clock, 1900 hours. And so when we talk about 24 hours, we normally say it like that, 1900 hours. We don't do a.m. or p.m. If I wanted to take 1700 hours and change it to 12-hour time, what I'm going to do is 1700 minus 12 gives me 5. And so 5, because it is over 12, I'm going to consider that to be a p.m. And so that's what's going to happen when I am converting it. In the zoom in section, I'm going to go over this a little bit more in detail, give some better examples, show you it worked out, but it's just a basic idea. If it's over 12, that means it's p.m. in 24-hour time. If it's under 12, that means it's a.m. in 24-hour time. As long as you go p.m. in a 12-hour time frame and you're converting to 24-hour, just know that you need to add 12 hours onto the time in p.m. to make it 24-hour. If it's under 12 if it's before 12 p.m., so if it's in the a.m. and you're converting it to 24-hour time, then you pretty much just add zeros, add the 2 zeros behind. There's nothing to change because 7 o'clock a.m. is the same thing as 700 hours. When we talk about trips, we're going to go into paying for trips. And so in paying for trips, we have different options that we can use. That can be a traveler's check, which is just a check that is prepared specifically for a traveler. It's signed over to them and you can use it to pay different bills. If it's lost, then it can be easily recreated and the funds can be easily given back to you, or can find a way to get the funds back if it's lost or if it's stolen, versus if cash is stolen, it's gone. If cash is lost, it's lost. If a debit card is taken and misused, then it's taken and it's misused. But traveler's checks are one of the safest routes of paying for a trip. A bank draft is also another option as well. What happens is you would go into the bank and ask the bank to prepare a check on your behalf for wherever you're making the payment to, and the bank writes a check directly to whomever you're paying it for, and or they write something. Yeah, it's really not a check, but it's called a bank draft, but you present it and it's a form of payment. It's similar to a check, but it's more it guarantees payment because it's written on behalf of the bank itself, not from a person's personal account or business account. When we talk about money and paying for trips, we need to make sure we are concerned or understand calculating currency. When we travel and we're traveling to different countries will have different currencies. So I can't take my Bahamian dollar and try to spend it in the UK. I need to get British pounds. And so that means I'm going to have to convert my Bahamian dollar into British pounds so that when I'm going to the UK, I only have British pounds to spend because that's all they're going to accept from me. And so how that works is normally the bank gives an exchange rate, and that rate is then used to calculate how much your Bahamian dollar, one Bahamian dollar, is worth in the currency that you want. And so here's an example. If they say the exchange rate is $1 to 0.625 euros, that means if I try to exchange one Bahamian dollar for €1, I'm not even going to get a whole dollar. I'm going to get about 63 cents for each dollar. And so if you're sending somebody, or if you're going to a foreign country with funds, you need to make sure you know how much you're going to have. And so normally it requires you to calculate how much you're going to carry based on the new currency. And so in this example, if I have $10,000 Bahamian dollars, BSD, that I'm going to carry with me to Europe, and you spending euros, then upon conversion, when I take my $10,000 to the bank and I ask them to give me euros in exchange, they're only going to give me 6,250 euros because that's the value of the euro compared to the dollar. And so each currency has a conversion rate. You can find them very easily on the internet. Even though we exchange Bahamian dollars and US dollars like it's nothing here, we can't do that in the States. And so if you go through the bank to get US dollars, oftentimes there is a charge, there's an exchange rate, and so you won't get as much money back as if you just exchange it at a cash register or throughout the community, things like that. And so that's very important to note as it relates to currency, that you have a lot of calculations that you need to do. Now, once you've understood how much cash you need to carry, you know what your itinerary is, you know where you're going, what you're staying, how long you're staying for, all of this information. Normally, you would then go on a trip. And after the trip is done, when you come back, you would be required to prepare an expense report for your company, letting them know the cost of the overall trip. And so with an expense report, what it is a report that's prepared by the traveler or their secretary or somebody who assists them, that lists all of the expenses, such as hotel, meals, airfare, travel, taxi. All of these things are normally listed in a report that gives an idea of how the funds were spent, how much funds were spent on this trip. All right. And so sometimes when you're going on a trip on behalf of a company, what they do is sometimes they give you funds ahead of the trip, and that's called advancing funds. So when funds are advanced, what happens is they give you the money ahead of time and you're able to spend it. In some instances, you can spend more. In some instances, you can spend less. If you spend more than you actually receive, then what happens, and of course, these have to be legitimate expenses, what happens is the company will normally pay you back the difference. And so that's the purpose of the report. The report is to see how much you actually spent. Did you spend all of what they gave you, or did you spend less of it? If you spent more, then they owe you funds. Like I said, if you spent less, then the difference you should give back to the company. That's kind of how it works. Now, when I say legitimate expenses, of course, I mean, you're not going to buy a luxury vehicle. Let's say you go to another country and you spend maybe $10,000 on a Lamborghini, just so you can drive in a Lamborghini in that country. That's not a legitimate business expense because that's kind of extra anyway. And so normally companies don't reimburse you for things that you decided to do without approval, especially if it's pretty expensive. So you want to make sure that any expenses that you incur, you are able to be reimbursed back for it, paid back. That's what reimburse means. In the event you go over the amount of money that they give you. All right. And so here's an example of a situation. A company gives you $1,000, but in total you spend $1,750. You spent over the $1,000 they gave you, so over the advanced amount, and so therefore the company has to pay you back $750. So you can expect to either get a check or have cash, or maybe them transfer to your account the difference between what was actually spent and how much funds they gave you. Because as long as the company sends you on a business trip, they should cover the cost of all of your legitimate expenses. Of course, if you received more than you spent, then you are due money back to the company. So if the company gave you $1,000, but you only spent $750 on the trip, then you have $250 to give back to the company. That's always expected. All right. So let's look at an example of an expense report that I was able to find. And so it's not filled out or anything like that, but common things I want you to identify about an expense report. Normally, you have to identify what period of time the travel was for on the expense report. The purpose of the travel as well is pretty important. Who traveled, and their employee information can be asked as well. The department they're traveling from. So if I'm a part of the accounts department and I made this trip, then that's my department. My manager can also sign off on the expense report as well, because normally managers are going to have to check and make sure that everything makes sense, everything lines up before any payments back or to are done. Here, what would happen is for each day, you would list off the days of your travel, give a description. So let's say if I spent $10 on gas for a vehicle that I have, then on this day, I'm going to put my date and I'm going to put vehicle gas. And underneath the relevant area, I'm going to put the $10. So the $10 is related to fuel and mileage. So I'm going to put $10 here. My airfare, I'm going to put the day that I purchased the ticket, airfare for travel, and then the cost of my airfare goes underneath air, and so on and so forth. Every cost that is incurred by the company or on your trip, you're going to list it here along with receipts, because you want to make sure you keep your receipts. And what happens is you list them under the relevant categories. All categories may not be the same, but normally they have air, lodging, which is hotel stay, fuel, mileage, normally transportation, phone, meals and trip, etc. These are your common ones. What happens is every cost related to that you're going to list underneath, so that you could have a subtotal for how much I spent on air and transport, how much did I spend on my hotel lodging stay, how much did I spend on fuel for this trip. And so each day you have to give an account for how much was actually spent, and it's totaled up. You get an overall subtotal, which should show how much I paid for the entire trip. Any advances, so if I, like I said, if I got $1,000, I would put that I received $1,000 in an advance, and anything left over is going to be considered to be a reimbursement. Anything, like you say, spent over the amount that was advanced is a reimbursement. All right. As you can see here, don't forget to attach receipts. Very important. Receipts are crucial. All right. And so once the expense report is prepared, when the person gets back, somebody has to authorize it before any payments can be made. Somebody reviews and make sure your receipts match up with your report, and then a payment can be made. All right. Normally, if they have sometimes they ask you to put a detailed description here, and then you just put everything up there. But that's just a basic idea of what an expense report looks like. Like I said, this is the after the trip is done. This is what needs to happen. All right. And so that covers travel. It covers what should happen before a person travels, which is a person should get together their travel folder, book any reservations, book any stays, make appointments. Any appointments that need to be made are going to be made as well. They should also, I don't know if I mentioned this, but you should also make sure you check your documents to make sure that they are up to date, because of course you don't want to wait until the day of travel to check your passport to realize your passport is expired or your visa is expired. So as a big part of before the travel, you're preparing by checking your documents, making sure they're up to date, by putting together your travel folder, by making any accommodations. And then during your trip, you're going to make sure that you pay attention to the etiquette, and the customs of whatever country you're traveling in. You're going to pay attention to your meeting times and be on time and things like that. And then, of course, after it's done, after you get back, you're going to follow up to see what you missed at work while you were gone. And then you're going to prepare an expense report that is going to give an idea of the total cost of that trip. These things are crucial. And this is a pretty straightforward section. Just a few things you just need to make sure you remember. Just make sure you remember what needs to be done before, during, and after. Know how to do an expense report, how to convert funds, remember information about time zones, and you should be good to go. So if there are any further questions, feel free to contact me. You know information. My email address is here, Instagram, comment section on the site. Let me know so that I can do my best to help you. Happy studying. Hi, Brenda here. I just want to take the time to say thank you for choosing this course. Thank you for choosing yourself and for preparing, as you should, for office procedures BGCSE. Look forward to more from me and Business Teacher Powell, and I look forward to seeing you in other classes. Bye.